chasing yours, and I try to.
I had this complete, overwhelming sense of certainty after about 9 months. It literally washed over me, like in a period of like a day or two, where I'm like, went from I want to be a Navy SEAL to like, I know I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. Complete certainty. I call it winning in your mind before you step foot in the battlefield, which is a famous Sun Tzu quote, the author of The Art of War. He said, victorious warriors win in their mind before they go to battle.
Hey, Mark. How you doing? It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Hey, Mark. How's it going?
Jamie, great to be here, man.
Thank you. It's an honor to speak with you.
Yeah.
So Mark Devine, he's a extremely decorated Navy SEAL, was #1 in his SEAL class, has commanded Navy SEALs, has authored books, one of which I just read, The Unbeatable Mind, which was fantastic. Entrepreneur, podcaster, all with the goal of helping service members as well as humanity as a whole. I think his story is going to resonate with what I'm talking about. My goal is to help those who struggle with anxiety, depression, fear, suicide. There was a point in my life where my biggest fear was talking to people. I had clinical panic disorder and social phobia, and any success I've had in life was a direct result of battling through those experiences. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's not as hard as being a Navy SEAL. Everybody knows that's the hardest thing on the planet, the most grueling military training on the planet. So I'd love to go back to your childhood. Where did it all begin, and where did that mental superhuman tenacity come from?
Well, it's interesting. Everyone's got their story, and I think each story, the fundamental architecture of an individual's character is usually found in some trauma. It's not the good things in life that necessarily shape character, it's the hard things. So in my case, I grew up in a really small town in upstate New York, and my father was a rager, and a lot of alcohol in the family. You know, you grow up in that environment and you absorb that as a young child, right? You just take it on. So for me, the way that manifested in the young Mark was like a deep sense of just incompleteness, not feeling whole or worthy. But I had some really good mechanisms to hide that, right? And so that shows up in, like trying to please and impress everybody, especially your parents, right? So perfectionism in school, being the life of the party, that led to a little bit of too much alcohol, right?
Okay.
So a little bit of issues there that I had to deal with. But deep inside, there was just this big hole, like something was missing. Because you grow up in a family like that, and there's this experience of not being loved, not being cared for. So it took me a long time to like learn how to take that energy. And there's multi-phases to this, Jamie, to like direct it toward, and similar to your case, direct it towards something that could make me feel good, make me feel like I belonged. And so for me, that was endurance sports. So I started to find this energy where I could feel good about myself in the Adirondack Mountains. We had a summer home, and our winter home where I went to school was a small town outside of Utica, New York, called Barneveld, population 397.
A beautiful area.
It's a gorgeous area, yeah. Central leather stocking region, they call it. It's Oneida County.
Is that near Bolton Landing?
Bolton Landing is about an hour to the north east, I think.
Okay.
That's kind of getting into the Adirondacks.
I've been there.
So this is south of the Adirondacks. It's more dairy country, kind of rolling hills.
Okay.
Really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And, I did get into sports, and I credit my mom for that. Like, she was an athlete, and she, kind of insisted that we go out and, every weekend during the winter, we were up on the ski slopes, and we had to go to do a sport after school, like a lot of parents require. And so I got into swimming, and I got into, tennis and a couple other things. But it was my time in the summers. We'd go up to the summer place that we had on Lake Placid, which is about 2 hours north of Bolton Landing. And we have a house, still have it to this day, my family, on the west shore of Lake Placid, and there's no road access. So we have this small fleet of boats, and we just take the boat over, and Chris Craft, and it was really like idyllic.
Yeah.
And I always, at that time, I believed that I had this perfect family. because that's part of the defense mechanism.
Sure.
Right? You can't, right? If things aren't right, then it's you that's wrong, not them.
Right.
What was beautiful about this is that my backyard was a mountain range, and the Adirondack Park is 6 million acres of unspoiled wilderness.
Yeah.
So in my early teens, I found that I just really enjoyed being out in the woods alone, hiking trails up and down the mountains, and I found that
It's an escape, right?
it was an escape from me. But also, like I would, literally, I had this friend, next door neighbor who went to Harvard, and we would run up Whiteface Mountain, and then we would wrap our ankles and put knee pads on, and we played tag all the way down.
That's awesome.
It was just a smoking workout.
So you had resistance training going up
Yeah,
and
we-
overspeed going down.
Exactly.
Yep.
And literally, the agility work of, the Adirondack Mountains, they're not roads going up these mountains. I mean, these are like really ruddy, rocky routes. And so we're literally just, I remember my first euphoric experience, and I was alone, and I would literally run up Whiteface Mountain, and I got to the top, and I had my little kit with my peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and so I get to the top, and I break out my PB&J and my water, and I sit, and I'm looking at, this just unbelievably panoramic view with Lake Placid below and all these mountains in the distance. And I had this like radical like expansiveness of my consciousness where I literally, it wasn't the same as an out-of-body experience, but it was like where I expanded beyond my body and I felt peaceful for the first time ever.
And what age was that?
Probably 15,
Okay.
sitting right around there, 15 or 16.
And you weren't doing like mushrooms laying around or
No,
something?
there were no mushrooms. I'm pretty sure I hadn't had any psychedelics. But it's that experience.
What did you feel?
The experience stayed with me. I felt like there's more to this life. There's more going on than what I've been led to believe. And all that shit that I'm going through, and all this feeling of not being whole, or feeling incomplete, or feeling unloved, shame, was all just a story.
So your dad was a pretty tough guy, it sounds like, right?
He was an asshole.
Okay.
Yeah. Great guy. Love you, Dad, if you ever watch this.
Yeah, no, I get it. He was,
He's a rager.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And
So this was
very disrespectful
an
guy.
epiphany from.
Yeah, so this is Epiphany. Again, I don't think I really understood it now. So, the lens of retrospect, especially with all the training experiences I've had, I really can now appreciate those moments for being really, really pivotal in my life.
Right.
Because even though I may not have been aware of it at that time, something shifted, right? And I'm very grateful for that because it was those subtle moments, and I could recount many of them, both up to and into my and throughout my SEAL experience, where I just had like this amazing grace that led me to like really want to investigate the nature of the mind and consciousness and like reality, because my upbringing was somewhat torturous, but at the same time I was experiencing bliss. And so, we can relate this later on to how we help through the Courage Foundation and through Unveiled Mind, people kind of like really break through their limitations and kind of go beyond the physiological and psychological barriers of anxiety, depression, self-loathing, all of which stems from some sort of trauma. And that trauma has both psychological and physiological impact that can last a lifetime.
Sure.
If unattended to. Anyway, so high school I was very kind of withdrawn. And of course I had a lot of females interested in me, but I had no mechanism, no means
I like how you say, of course.
Yeah, no means to communicate with them, right? Like
Yeah.
I was like the guy that
Right.
the girls would have to ask
Sure,
me out.
sure,
And
yeah.
then I would go and
So you were
they'd be
shy.
like, hello, anybody in there?
Right. So you were fairly shy, it sounds like.
I was extremely shy.
Yeah.
At the same time, it looked like to everyone else that I was an extrovert. Because,
Sure.
my mom got us into the music. She actually started up a musical series at our high school, I think to give me something to do and to get her out of
Sure.
get herself out of the
Yeah.
house at night when my dad was drinking. And so, I'm in these musicals. I had 12 varsity sports. I was the president of the varsity club, or 12 varsity letters,
So you were successful.
So I was doing all
Yeah.
the right things. Straight
Yeah.
A student. Fortunately, because of all that because of my intellect and my physical prowess, I was able to get into a decent college. So I got into Colgate University, which is pretty good.
Great school.
Lower Ivy School, upstate New York, 45 minutes from my home.
Yeah.
So they didn't let me stray too far from the nest.
Yeah.
And at Colgate, I was recruited to swim, so I began competitive swimming there and joined the fraternity, and I'm off to the races. But I remember, again, being very unconfident, like really lacked confidence. I went from this super, like, pretty vanilla public high school, Holland Patton High. We had 200 students in my class. 4 of us went on to college. And God bless them, but the biggest club in the school was Future Farmers of America. It's a big dairy farm.
Right.
And I was not a future farmer of America.
So for all intents and purposes, you should have felt great about yourself. You had everything going for you.
I did not feel good about myself.
Right.
Yeah, I had outwardly everything. And this is a pretty common story, right? Like I was a pretend machine, right? Doing everything to make myself look good.
Yep.
But
Facebook.
inside I just, had that, I guess they call it imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
A quick example of how that played out. So, my school, we didn't have any AP courses. I really didn't know how to study. I remember this is just funny stuff, and
I love it.
this is all stream of consciousness
Yeah.
here, but the very first paper I wrote, this is going back a little bit in time. So I did this paper on all the bombers in World War II. And I did all my research on my 3x5 cards and read them all out. And then I wrote this paper, and of course I made the big mistake of showing it to my mom, wanting to
And
get
she was
her
like, "Oh
approval.
shit," or what?
And she said, "This is horrible. You got to redo it."
Why didn't she like it?
Because she's mom.
Yeah.
It didn't meet her standards.
Wow.
I guess. I
And
don't
it's
know.
something
But
you loved. Yeah.
the point is that's just the devastating thing to say to your kid.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's when I learned that cheating was actually acceptable. So I broke out the Encyclopedia Britannica and
Love it.
rewrote the paper.
That's awesome.
Anyway, so I go to Colgate University, and my mom, the parents, again, I'm not espousing anything that isn't any different than a vast majority of people in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Where parents say, you're not going to do that because we're not that.
Right.
Especially not the military.
Right.
What's acceptable is medical, right? Not academic. You're not going to be a professor. You can become a doctor or
So there was a
business guy.
path and then limits at the same time.
that. So here's the narrow range. So
Yeah.
doctor or business, because we were a family business. In fact, Divine Brothers, which the business that my father ran, was his father's and his father's father, started by his grandfather. Been in the family since 1795.
Yeah, hard to break out of that.
Yeah, and all my siblings back east.
Yeah, there's some inherent
We're
pressure.
still there. And I was expected to either become a doctor or to come back and be
Sure.
part of the family business. So I go to Colgate as a pre-med. Freshman year, I'm taking biology, English, and physics in the fall. And I really enjoyed physics, actually. I was enjoying it. I was getting a lot out of it. But it's one of those classes, it had like 100 people in the class, and it was an Iranian professor who barely spoke English. No quizzes, so there's no feedback, just a midterm and a final.
Yeah.
So I go into the midterm.
See how you do.
And I'm like, I'm reading this paper. I'm like, I don't know, what the fuck? It has nothing to do with what we studied, right?
Right.
And I get like a 40 on it.
Okay.
And I'm from Holland Pat. I never got anything less than an A.
Right.
Right? I was like number 3
So how
in
did
my
that hit you
class.
when you got a 40? How'd you feel?
And I'm like, I've never failed anything in my life.
Yeah.
And so I went to the freshman dean who was brand new, and he said, "Oh, you probably should drop the class." And he said, "Talk to the professor." So I talked to the professor. The professor says, "You should drop the class." So I have a friend. I joined a fraternity, and this friend was in that class, Chris, who went on to be a very successful doctor, by the way. And at the end of the semester, I was just sitting around having a beer with Chris at our new fraternity house, Beta Theta Phi, and I was like, "Hey, Chris, you're in that physics class, right?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Remember that midterm? That was bloody, wasn't it?"
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah, I got a 29.
So you were the
I
highest
was
grade?
like, I got a 40. He goes, "Dude, you had one of the highest grades."
That's funny.
He says, "Didn't you ever hear of a curve?" And I was like, "No."
Wow.
What's a curve?
Oh my God. That's hysterical.
That's how, literally, that's what happened when you grow up in a
And
town
then you
of
had all these
300
people
men.
saying you should quit this, and you had one of the best.
I
That's
had one of the
funny.
highest grades in the class. So anyways, that was also really impactful because even though I quit the class, I wasn't meant to be a doctor. Right? So I looked at that and said, you know what?
So if
Relating
you
it
thought
back
it
to
was
what
an A,
happened
you'd be
before,
a doctor.
This was meant to happen.
Yeah.
Even though I now know that I'm smarter than I
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
I was.
right.
I wasn't meant to be a doctor.
Isn't it really hard for people to understand that? Like, if they
Things
fail at
happen.
something, somebody
Yeah.
gets fired from a job, and they're just devastated, and it's really potentially pushing them in a better direction. But it's
And
so hard to see
and
that.
that's the
at
key
time.
point, Jamie. If you could realize now,
Mm-hmm.
up front, that everything that happens, good, bad, and the ugly, is happening for a reason,
Yeah,
or countless reasons, and that to immediately look for the silver lining, to immediately look for like, okay, there's something good about this. You may not know right away, but just trust. There's some reason, some valuable lesson, or some really good reason for them. It's like, had I gone down that road, I wouldn't have been a Navy SEAL. I wouldn't have met my
Yeah.
wife. I wouldn't have my family. We wouldn't be sitting here talking.
Can I mention one thing? It's interesting too, though. Like a Navy SEAL might say, let's just say you did fail it. The personality I would think would be like, well, fuck that. I'm going to go keep trying and pound my head until I succeed, right? And it seems like even people like I know, a good friend of mine got fired from her job, worked extremely hard at it for years. And maybe it should push her in a different direction, which is what I'm saying. But she's like, no, I just need to keep persevering down that path. But it doesn't feel like it's the right path.
If it's the right path and it feels right, then it's good to be persevering, to persevere and to drive
Right,
toward
sure.
it. This is a good point to kind of like introduce this idea of the other thing that I got out of being in the wilderness in the Adirondacks and also being an endurance athlete is that I learned to spend time with my thoughts. And there were moments, especially like that moment on top of the mountain or when you're just like driving up the mountain, like literally running past the hikers or just cruising down or the moments where you're just like, just enjoying, like being in the woods. Where, again, I didn't know really how to put words to it at the time, where I would just kind of like be a little bit separate from my thoughts.
Disassociate a little bit.
It's not a disassociation. It's more of a little bit of expansion
Okay.
to where the thoughts slow down and you begin to disidentify from them. And so I had this distinct experience, and later on, when I got down to New York after college, I started Zen training, and I'll tell that story. And suddenly, I really started to understand because I was getting some discrete mental training. Like
Sure.
I had some experience of that. That's why I was able to take to Zen very, very easily, whereas a lot of people struggle with it. In these moments, I would be able to see my thinking as if it was like a different part of my being.
Okay.
And that part of me that was watching the thinking, it's like, oh, there's thinking happening, but that's not me. The thinking is not who I am because I can see it happen. So who's the I that's watching the thinking? Obviously, it's not the thinker. Maybe not so obvious to most people, right? My point is, I learned to be able to kind of like shut off the thinking, especially like think about competitive swimming. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, what are you doing? Breathing, inhale, hold, exhale. Inhale, hold, exhale. And then that thought stream, if I'm completely immersed in it, then I'm always going to be like, I'm going to be wasting energy. So I need to be concentrated on what I'm doing.
Instead of just thinking about it.
So I would either say a mantra or I just count strokes. And then the thinking would settle down. And then so this is what I call concentration training, basically. So you concentrate on this one thing. For me, while swimming, it was my breath and a count. And then later on, and I took this into SEAL training, it was a mantra. It was a saying. So I know
What was the
I'm
saying?
jumping back
Sure. Yeah.
timeline-wise, but it'll all,
Yeah.
like an infinity loop. Time is a construct of the mind,
Yep.
right? So ultimately, it's all
Interweave.
just
yeah.
one thing. So in SEAL training, my mantra was, I'm feeling good, I'm looking good, I ought to be in Hollywood.
I like that.
So like, for instance, go out on a 20-mile run, right? And within the first mile, I had settled into my pattern. So inhale, 3 steps, exhale, 3 steps. Inhale, 3 steps, exhale, 3 steps. Get that going down. And then it'd be like, feeling good, looking good.
When would you say that? In between breaths? Or?
Yeah, so inhale,
Okay.
1, 2, 3, I'm feeling good. Exhale, 3 steps, I'm looking good. Inhale, ought to be.
It's over and over
exhale,
and over.
and Hollywood. And just keep that going. The only other thoughts that I allowed into my mind were setting specific mini goals. Like, okay, I'm going to do this.
Like a micro goal.
Yeah, micro. I'm going to do this rep for 100 reps, and then I'm going to pause, or I'm going to do this until I get to that sign up there, and then that's my target. I'm not going to worry about anything after that. So I developed these skills that I call the Big Four skills, and they're taught to Navy SEALs now today, and that's you read about that in Unbeatable Mind. So controlling the breath controls your arousal response and keeps you nice and calm, and I would love to go into
Sure.
like, the science behind that. And then the second is the developing mental control through attention control and concentration. And so attention control, you control by directing your attention at the mantra or at the micro goal. And concentration, you maintain that through the repetitive, positive internal dialogue.
Okay.
And then the third skill is imagery, so visualization. So why is this powerful?
I'm terrible at that, by the way. But
Well, it's so important. We'll have to work on that because your entire future will unfold based upon the quality of the imagery you have in your mind. So if you have kind of fractured and like negative views of your future, then that's exactly what's going to be your future. So everything in life is created first in the mind.
Sorry to interrupt. My son, who's 10, pretty good basketball player, and I'm trying to work on visualization, something I was not great at.
It's a skill. You just
But
gotta
he
practice.
told me, he goes, I see misses when I visualize. I go, sit in your bed and do the breathing. I'm trying to teach him box breathing, which we'll get into, and then I'm like, visualize the ball going in over and over. And he goes, yeah, but I see him miss. Because there's a study, I think it was in Australia, where they had 10 people, I want to say, visualizing free throws, and then 10 people practicing. The people visualizing actually did better than the people practicing.
Yeah.
And he goes, Dad, every time I do it, I see the ball miss.
Maybe take them to the court and have them
Yeah.
just snapshot a great throw and
Yeah.
then remember that.
Right. I like that.
Or another way to do it is like you could video him dunking the ball and then have him watch that video so he's got a reference point.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the imagery work was the third skill. And so for me, there's two ways that imagery is really powerful. One is like a practice, like you're talking about. So practicing a skill, and you can also practice becoming the person that you want to be. And so that's what I did. Right? In fact, I learned this, we can kind of pause here and talk about imagery. When I was at Colgate in swimming, I had a coach who was a kind of a pioneer with sports psychology, and he believed in visualization. This is 1983, so it's pretty early. So he said, Mark, I want you to practice swimming your event in your mind with a stopwatch at night. And of course, I'm in this fraternity house. We were going through 40 kegs of beer a week, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I lived in a
stopwatch.
room, about the size of this little square here with four
You're doing a
bunks in it.
stopwatch on how
Yeah.
long it takes to chug a beer.
Exactly, I can visualize that.
Yeah.
Like 0.03 seconds. But I said, yeah, I'll do this.
Yeah.
I trust. I didn't want to let him down. Codependence was part of my, makeup. So
Sure.
I was like, I'm not going to let Coach down.
Yeah.
So even though I thought this was crazy, and I started doing this, and literally it was a disaster. I couldn't hold my stroke was a breaststroke, and so we were 200-meter breaststroke was the main event for me. So I closed my eyes, I could see the gun go off, I would jump into the water, or do my underwater, swim out, and then I'd be thinking about the girl,
Yeah.
right?
The monkey mind.
Yeah, the monkey mind. Visualization, by the way, it's a good point that you bring up, is one of the most powerful ways to develop concentration. To holding an image in your mind. That's why we use it all the time for concentration training with our company on Bill Mind. And so anyways, I went and talked to Benson. I said, Coach, this isn't working. I can't hold my mind for even one stroke or one length. And he said, Mark, you just have to stick with it. It's just like, learning to ride a bike. You're not going to be good at it at first. But if you stick with it, you'll get better. Trust me. So grudgingly, I went back to my virtual races, and he was right, but it took time. It took literally almost the entire season before I could swim the entire 200-meter race underwater in my mind. And what's really cool is by the time I could do the race in my mind with my eyes closed, and clicked the stopwatch, I started to get the same time or very, very close to the same time.
Interesting.
And it was about 3 seconds faster than my fastest time. And if anyone knows swimming, like 3 seconds is a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was sophomore spring. And guess what? I got into an overseas study program. That's a whole other cool story about perseverance or persistence. So I go to London in the fall with this economic study group. And so I don't swim. In fact, I don't do much of anything besides run and some push-ups and stuff. Come back in the spring, and I've kind of missed the whole season, so I wasn't going to swim at all.
Sure.
But I run into Bob Benson, Coach Benson,
Yeah.
in February or early March, and the season's wrapping up. And he goes, "Mark, great to see you. How was London? All the pleasantries." And I said, "Great." He said, "Hey, we've got our championship meet coming up in 2 weeks. You want to get in the pool with the team?"
I haven't swam in a year.
Yeah. Every part of my being is going like, "No effing way."
Yeah.
But I'm like, "Sure."
Right. Let's do it.
Right. Let's do it. And so I was at the meet, and I'm on the block. I'm breathing. I'm calm. Like, this is cool. Gun goes off. I jump in the water, and after the first length, I'm just having this feeling like I've swum this race before.
Yeah.
And I touch the pad at the end. I look up, and I got the time.
Wow.
And just like that time in the mountaintop, that was one of those moments where I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here?
So it showed you the power of the mind.
Power of the mind. Mm-hmm. So fast forward, I'm in New York, and I'll finish up the fourth skill.
Right, yeah.
We already talked
Sure.
about it. It's the micro goals, right?
Yep.
So those 4 skills: breath control, mental control through attention, concentration, and positive dialogue, imagery work by practicing either the skill or practicing becoming who you need to be, and then setting small targets that are achievable, and you can rapidly develop momentum by striking up these daisy chaining these wins.
Yep.
So back to visualization. I graduated Colgate University in 1985, and 6 weeks later, I'm down in Manhattan working for Coopers and Lyman. And they send me to NYU as part of a cohort
Great school.
to get a master's in accounting, which I ended up getting an MBA in finance. And so the program was in concert with other Big 8 firms to test whether a liberal arts graduate could be a more well-rounded partner or, whatever.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a partner, but they were
Right.
looking for, down the road, 10 years from then, more well-rounded partner.
Sure.
As opposed to like just the narrow, more accounting grads. Because we didn't even have an accounting class at Colgate.
Okay.
So I had to get the accounting master's, and then that qualified me to sit for the certified public accounting, the CPA exam, which I passed after 4 tries.
So you're going to be a CPA.
Yeah, so I became a CPA, got my MBA. And yet the most momentous thing that happened to me while I was in New York for this 4-year period is I was looking for, I considered myself to be, I didn't articulate it this way at the time, Jamie, but a lifetime athlete.
Okay.
Similar to yourself. Like, I looked at all the people that I was working with in their pasty white skins and puffy,
Yeah.
bellies in their suits. And I said, that's not who I am.
Right.
Right. I'm in this environment. I'll make the most of it, but I'm going to stay in shape and I'm going to train. So every morning I would get up and run, about 6 miles, come back and do some stretching and journaling. And then at lunchtime I would go to the gym, New York Athletic Club, and I'd bang out what we now know as a high-intensity interval training
Right.
session.
Yeah.
I would literally cordon off like a wolf. I said, "This is my stuff.
Running
Don't
up and
touch
down
it." And I would just go round and round, up and down, round.
Right.
Until
Running
I
up
was
and
like
down the
just-
Adirondacks will do that too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like just dripping sweat in and out in 45 minutes.
Now they have a name for it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Cooper's would let us off at 5 because we had to be down at the World Trade Center. NYU Business School, Stern was down at the old Trade Center at the time. So we had to be down there by 7:30 for night classes. So we had a 2.5-hour window, so most students would go home and have a meal and do
Yeah.
some studying and prep. Yours truly looked at that window and said, "That's a good training block.
Wow.
Like, what can I do there?"
Yeah.
And I didn't really have the time to, and nor did I want to swim anymore. And I was, for a while, I rode my bike because I was still doing triathlons. But riding your bike in New York City was like kind of rough for me.
That's pretty tough, yeah.
And so I was looking for something to do. And one day I was kind of walking down 22nd Street and just kind of in this reverie, like, what am I going to do? And I heard these shouts coming from this second floor of this building, and I stop and I look up. There's this big sign or flag, and it says World Sado Karate Headquarters. I'm like, interesting. Now, it flashed back to me that my freshman roommate, David Bowman, he was a real jerk. Right?
Okay.
David, he literally did everything he could to piss off the girls underneath us in our dorm, right? So he literally stole this big dumbbell from the gym, and he would, from the top bunk, he would launch it onto the floor, piss them off, and they that be screaming.
I know that guy.
Yeah, he was that guy.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Funny, though, at the time, sort of. Right.
I wanted the girls to like me, not hate me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do anything to be liked at that
Right.
time. I noticed he got into something called Shotokan karate that this teacher from Colgate taught karate. And so I watched him get into it in freshman year. I didn't think much of it, but by the time senior year rolled around, like David had completely transformed. Like he was quiet, reserved, respectful, humble even.
Okay.
Ripped, and he was going off to Japan to teach English and to continue his studies.
Yeah.
And me, on the other hand, I had drank a lot of beer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was typical at this
I was the same guy.
Yeah. Right.
Just a little bit older.
Yeah. So there's this dichotomy. What the hell?
And so I was like, what's that?
This transformation.
What's that? And so when I saw that Sado Karate, I'm like, I remember Dave, and I said, this could be really good for me. So I go up in the studio, and I see this Japanese man who's about 5'6" in the middle of the floor, just a complete tank. His name was Nakamura.
Okay.
Tadashi Nakamura.
Yeah.
And it turns out like he was a famous karateka from Japan. 1963, they had a ticker tape parade because in that year, the Thais challenged the martial arts world and said, we're the preeminent martial art. If you don't believe us, come fight us.
Yeah.
And the only one who took about Nakamura and two of his peers took him up on it. And they went to Thailand, and they had this big tournament. And Nakamura won. Two of the three Japanese won.
Wow. Yeah.
Anyways.
So
So
he was
Nakamura was head instructor for a guy named Masayama. Masayama was the founder of Kyokushinkai,
Okay.
which is a vicious fighting art and tournament fighting. And Masayama was famous for cutting the horn off of a charging bull with his hand.
Come on.
Kid you not.
Holy
Okay,
shit.
so this is another one of those data points, right?
Yeah.
So I go and I join Sado Karate.
He would like karate chop the horn from a bull.
The bull was charging, and he literally would just cut the horn off.
Jesus.
Yeah. How do you do that? Like, how does a human being do
You don't
that?
want to run into that guy.
So again, this is another, getting into the martial art, an authentic martial art is another one of those data points that taught me that the human being is capable of far more than the average person thinks.
20x, 50x, right?
20x, then 20x
Yeah.
again, yeah.
Yeah.
So within 6 months of joining Sado Karate, they had a demonstration, right? This was like the 10th year anniversary in Madison Square Garden. So I'm like, go to Madison Square Garden, this is gonna be cool. People doing their little katas and fighting and everything, but then Nakamura comes out and he's gonna do his demonstration. So what does
With
he
the- with
do?
the bull?
He's got two things of ice. One of them is 5 blocks of ice, each block, maybe like 8 to 10 inches thick with little wood pieces in between it.
Yeah.
And then another one stacked up kind of like this. And the first one, like he looks at it and then he lines up and he just does like a roundhouse kick and just like cuts through him like butter.
Ice. Just
Ice.
blocks of ice.
Big blocks of ice. And then he comes over, everyone's like, holy shit. Then he comes over to this other one, and he looks at it, and he goes into this really deep meditative state. And all of a sudden, before you knew it, he barely could see him move. He moves
Yeah.
so fast. He just, and with his forehead, he just,
Oh my God. What
this
the
ice
hell?
just shatters. And I remember watching that going, oh. Wow.
And he wasn't injured. His hand,
Not
his
at all.
head.
No, I would kill the average person to even
Jeez.
try to do that.
Yeah.
So there was something that he was doing with his mind through a lot of training, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Is this on video anywhere?
Probably.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see all
Probably
that.
would be cool to see that. I wanted to really get into like that type of training, and I was maybe impatient. I was like, because just the karate was like, I got this.
Yeah.
Feels a lot like sport, except it's now I'm learning I'm learning more self-confidence because, when you fight in a martial art, like let's say you have 400 fights, well, you win 200 of them, you lose 200 of them. So at least the 200 you win, you're feeling pretty good.
Right, yeah.
And the 200 you lose, it's a respectful encounter, and you learn something. So I learned how to get punched, and I learned how to fall down and get up with a lesson instead of a bruise.
So it's training resilience and
Training
growth
resilience.
through pain.
Like how do he used to say, fall down 7 times, get up 8. Now it's funny because we laugh about that now
Yeah.
because like if you fall down 7 times.
My kid thinks Dwayne Wade said that.
Well, it's actually an inaccurate statement because if
Yeah.
you fall down 7, you get up 7.
Right. You can't get up.
Unless you start down. Now, if you start down and fall down 7,
Well,
you
it's
get
funny,
up 8.
kids understand that because I told it to my basketball team. They were 9-year-old last year, and they're all just staring at me. They're like, "It doesn't add up," you know. It's pretty funny.
Anyway, so I noticed about 3 or 4 months into this training, I noticed I stayed on Thursday nights. Thursday nights they have a black belt class, and I was a white belt. And I wanted to stay to watch the black belt class,
Sure.
and I said, fine, no problem, right? So I stayed and watched the black belt class. I was like, wow, you know, and this is headquarters. He had like 300,000 students at that time around the world. Now he's probably got 1 million.
Good.
So he had anywhere from 1st degree up to 6th degree black belts. And they would all come, you know, and other studios that were Sado related, you know, even all the way up to Albany sometimes they come, and around the world sometimes they would come. And so it was quite a treat to get to watch these black belts train. So after the black belt class ended, everyone's kind of shuffling out, but I noticed a small group of like 10 people stayed around. And the lights kind of went down, and the candle got lit, and they went over and they took out these little wooden benches, and they started to line them up. And so I asked one of the people there, I said, what are they doing? I said, oh, that's the Zen class. I was like, what's Zen? And they said, well, it's meditation. And I said, how can I learn more? Can I join it? And they said, well, you're going to have to ask Kaicho. It's usually just for black belts. I said, okay. He said, but if you want to learn more, there's a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind by a guy named Suzuki. So I went to the library and I got the book and I started reading it. I was like, I didn't really understand much of it at the time.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, and it was talked all about, you know, mental development, mental training, spiritual development, what that, you know, experience is like from his perspective and that
Sure.
sort of. So I got the courage up a month or 2 later to ask Mr. Nakamura. We call him Kaicho, which means grandmaster. And I was really intimidated, but the guy was not intimidated. He was intimidating, but he was just full of love. Like this guy, he was so different than anyone else I'd ever seen in the planet.
He wasn't your stereotypical warrior, just...
Yeah, and he was like the opposite of my father.
Yeah.
And so he became a father figure for me. He was my first mentor, but it really is just his presence. Like he was just so radically present. He would give everyone his undivided attention. Like he was an intense warrior, and he's like, you don't fuck with this guy. At the same time, he was
He had
spontaneous.
a love and a humility to him.
He had humility. He was funny. Like, you know, he'd be like, fine, yeah. And then someone would crack a joke over here, and he would just like light up like a little schoolgirl.
How did you become a SEAL then? How did that happen? How did
Okay,
you go
so
from here to
this will
there?
tie back to the visualization. So, in meditation with Zen began to take its effect. Like building upon it gave me a toolbox and a container to begin to work with some of the experience that I had before, because those are like one-off experiences.
Sure.
And now every Thursday I'm sitting on this bench for 45 minutes, and the practice that he gave us is like, I call it concentration camp.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Sure.
Because Zen is an austere practice. They work with concentration to get to satori or enlightenment, and that's a very valid path, and it's very valid for Westerners because we don't know how to concentrate because we're distracted all over the place.
And sorry to interrupt, but I think people, and I've done this, where like, oh, breathing is easy and Zen and all that's easy, and it's not.
It's not
Like
easy.
if you really try to breathe for half an hour the way you taught in your book, I did it a couple weeks ago, it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not
very
easy
difficult.
until it is.
Yeah. Right, yes,
Just again, it takes practice.
right.
And it's a daily discipline practice. So I learned that, and Nakamura talked a lot about that. At the end of every class, he would have a little koan talk, you know. Koan is like a interesting, pithy saying that points towards some truth. It may not be the truth, because there's no way that you can actually describe the truth of what's really going on here in this world with language. Because language is built in duality, and the truth comes from unity or non-duality. So that's why koans are considered like pointers. So one of the koans was one day, one lifetime. And then he would talk about what this meant to him, right? And so, you know, for him, one day, one lifetime meant like every day is a precious gift. Every day is everything you need, you can find in a day.
There's abundance.
If you pay close enough attention. You have everything you need if you pay attention. And furthermore, from the warrior's perspective, this day is precious because it may be your last. And so let's make it a good one, right? One day, one lifetime. That's stayed with me, and it's part of a framework what I teach people is like, pay attention, make sure this day is the day.
It's a one-day contract.
Can you imagine if every day is the day where you are going to just show up, bring your full self to the table.
Yeah.
You're going to knock the ball out of the park. You're going to be focused. You're going to be present. You're going to be
Well, it's like
humble.
if somebody came down and they said, you're going to die in 46 days or whatever.
Right. What would you do?
Right.
It's slightly different because if you knew you only had 45 days to live, then you would probably completely
urgency.
reorganize your life and make your amends and get in your bucket list.
Sure.
Whereas one day, one lifetime is you're not changing your mission, your trajectory. You're not blowing up relationships. You're just bringing your whole self to the table, making sure you just crush it.
Yeah, you're living in the present for that
Yeah,
one day.
exactly. So I love that. And part of that was every day is a practice. The Japanese term for that is shugyo. Your life is a practice. And so when do you practice? You practice now, today. And so I listened to that and I said, oh, wow, I got to do more than just Thursdays.
Yeah.
So I bought myself one of those little wooden benches and I started practicing every morning. And I've never stopped.
Wow.
And so it was taking the practice home with me and doing it every morning that suddenly just everything started to shift. So
It becomes you.
yeah, so within 6 months, I started to have like pretty profound shifts in my awareness. And we'd do the concentration training where he had us inhale, exhale, count one. Don't think of anything. You know how hard that is?
Yeah, don't think of a pink
Don't
elephant.
think of anything besides the inhale, the exhale, and that number one. And then inhale, exhale, number two. And try to get to 10.
But if you do it enough, you could.
It takes a lot. Like I would get to one. And then, maybe a few weeks later, I could do two.
Yeah.
It took about 6 months before I could get up to 6 or
So
7.
the goal is for it to become automatic.
Just to be able to hold your attention. And the concentration is literally actively, through mental effort, crowding out, ignoring, denying. It's hard, actually. All these other thoughts.
Sure.
It's like the opposite of mindfulness. Mindful awareness, mindfulness is a different type of practice where you sit and kind of, it's a monitoring, you're monitoring your thoughts. It's a valuable practice
Yeah,
as
because I
well.
heard Phil Jackson, coach of the Bulls, he would have them meditate.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a different form of meditation, but he would have the thoughts come in and he wouldn't necessarily give them any credence.
You
They
don't
just
do-
come in
that's
and out. And
mindfulness.
okay.
Just monitoring.
Totally different.
Without any judgment. It's passive
Okay.
monitoring.
Yeah.
So it's a valuable practice to disengage from your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with mindfulness is most people do it still believing that they are the thinker. So they're really just thinking about their thinking. And that's not what mindfulness was intended for. Mindfulness was intended to separate you from the thinker to be more the witness. And witness is from a state of pure awareness, which is probably beyond the scope of.
And this is like easy for you to do now just because you've
Now
done
it
so
is.
much of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But
So is it
what
just taking
what I
the
learned-
self, the ego out, away?
Yeah, well, the thoughts are the ego. The ego is the sum total of the mental and physical conditioning from the experiences of your life, which then create this sense of identity as a separate individual.
Like a story.
It's a storyline. And when you practice mindfulness, but mindfulness built on top of a concentration practice is much more effective than just trying to. So if you could jump right into mindfulness like it's brought to the United States, then you tend to just do that thinking about my thinking. So you might ask, what was happening to me as I was, I'm 20, now 22, 23 years old, and I'm doing a daily practice Zen, plus I'm doing my running, and I'm doing my workouts, and I'm doing
Yep.
my karate, and I'm going to school at night, and I'm working full time during the day. But when I would sit on the bench, especially in the long sits on Thursday nights, after I learned how to really concentrate my mind and I could hold that concentration there and get up to close to 10, sometimes I'd have to reset. Part of the practice was, so attention control is hold your attention. Concentration is hold the attention for a long period of time. And then attention control comes back in when you notice that that you've suddenly shifted your concentration
Okay.
back to a thought, or you split it. And this is a very common thing. We have split attention. You might call it microtasking or multitasking. So split attention is where I'm counting, breathing, counting, and I am concentrating on that, but simultaneously there's some other dialogue going on and I'm paying attention to it.
Okay.
When I could get to a point where over 50% of my time was 100% concentrated on the practice, and I could quickly identify when I left the practice, either split attention or lost attention, and brought it back quickly.
Okay.
What I noticed is my mind would then, it's almost like I'd given it so much strength. You imagine like concentration practice is like gathering up all the mental energy that you've frittered away all these different directions and narrowing it into a single stream.
Okay.
Like moving your mind from being like a floodlight to like a laser beam.
Mine is like a floodlight.
Most people's are, right? Because that's the way they were trained in the West. But something weird happened because as that stabilized, as my mind stabilized and was able to hold that attention, I would find myself suddenly just dropping off. Like I would come out and I wasn't thinking, but I wasn't doing the practice either. And sometimes 10 minutes had lapsed. Sometimes it felt like 10 minutes was only a minute. And every time that happened, I would bring something back with me, like an insight or a sensation. And so this is like my intuition starting to light up. You know, intuition is really a complex thing, but part of it is the messages from the heart, from your gut. And now we know from science telling us that we have neurological processing in both the biome and the heart. So they're brains.
Okay.
Right? Heart brain, the gut brain. The entire enteric nervous system is part of your brain. So I started to get this feeling of whole mind. Like my mind was not in my brain, in my head. My mind was in my body. And also, your mind extends outside your body, so you can get information. It's called transrational intuition. You get information from universal consciousness, let's call it. So I would come back from these journeys to wherever, journeys to the void, to the emptiness.
Yeah.
To the sacred silence, I learned to call it. And I kept coming back with the sensation that A, I was heading down the wrong path and fast with my CPA and MBA. And B, that I was meant to be a warrior. Now, I'm 23. I had never considered the military. My father had a really bad experience with the military. Like he got drunk. The story was, even though he refutes it to this day, that he drove a friend's car into a fraternity house when he was drunk, and the judge basically said, here's your options. A, go to jail. B, go to the Army. Dad goes, B.
Right, go
So
in the Army.
he didn't have a great association with the Army. He drank his way through 2 years in
And your
Germany.
association, obviously, as you're saying, wasn't super strong, yeah?
No, so for our family, the military was for people who didn't have any other options in life or couldn't make it.
And as a result of your dad, it caused you some pain.
Yeah. So I never considered the military, but there I am sitting on this bench, and I'm being told by my intuition, my guidance system, that I'm meant to be a warrior. So I'm like, huh. And at first I discounted it. That's what the ego does, right? Ego will resist reality. And because, all the excuses immediately flood in. Like, there's no way I can do that. I've already invested so much in this career. I'm going to be an MBA CPA. Oh, by the way, there's no money in the military, I'm going to go make some money.
Yeah. Yeah, you put all the effort in, you
And
succeeded.
by the way, what would my parents think, what my peers think, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
All the
There's a lot there, especially
bazillion
after.
excuses that the
Yeah.
ego will tell you, all of them false. But I was committed to this practice, and I felt amazing. Anytime this happened, like everything around me became thick, like the texture, almost like electric. And I remember leaving the dojo and getting on the subway and going home, and I'm just feeling like everything is just in perfect balance and like almost electricity coming out of my hands, and it would last for hours. Like
Because you were making this
incredible
decision.
flow state. It wasn't about the decision. It was about the presence. In radical presence, you begin to the separation, the veil of separation falls apart, falls away, and you just feel connected to everything.
And you didn't know warrior meant the military at this time.
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, I stuck with this practice because A, I felt so good, and B, I really trusted Nakamura. Like, he thinks this is good, and it's going to make me more like him, then I'm doing this.
Yeah.
That's the power of a good mentor. right, for mental development and mental health. It's really important to have someone to anchor to who says, this is, I want to be like that. So what does he do? Or she. So I kept practicing, right? So this is now another, let's just say 6 months go by, and I'm having more and more of these experiences. And so I'm like, okay, I better get serious about looking at this. And so I began to ask different questions. Instead of saying, oh, that's not me, I would say, well, pointing to my CPA, if that's not me, who am I? And what am I supposed to do? And so, I started consuming, tapes like books like Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and asking how other people learn this. And this is, again, 1985. We didn't have much of that stuff back then.
Yeah.
I think I discovered Tony Robbins' initial tape series probably like 1988 or 89, probably after I'd already got into the SEALs, and that was helpful. But so I started to journal a little bit more seriously and asking different questions. So I said, well, what am I really passionate about? And so I wrote a list of likes and dislikes, kind of like passions or non-passions. And the things that I disliked, I was doing them all. And the things that I liked the most, I was doing infrequently, except for exercise.
And that's amazing. That's most people in life. If you really think about it, they're just going down these paths that they think will make them successful and happy.
That's right.
And it could be the opposite, right? Because it's not their true calling.
And then I asked myself, what is really important to me? So values. Again, this is no leadership training, but like, what am I really principled about? Is it making money? And when I finally, I really got serious about that, I'm like, no, I'm actually not that. Money is not it for me. So there was some sense of service that was really important to me. And I also really valued training, right? Like daily discipline
being a warrior.
Training. Yeah. So these things, the likes and dislikes, or the likes, and the things I was principled about started to like shape this idea of who I was. So then I asked myself, well, knowing those things, like, who am I really? And I realized that word that kept coming to me was the answer. I'm a warrior.
Yeah.
But, mind you, I didn't come off the bench and suddenly say I'm a Navy SEAL. No, it's like a warrior. So then I said, okay, I accept I'm a warrior. This is over a period of...
Where do I target it?
This is all happening over a period of months, not like on insight.
Yeah.
Yeah, how am I supposed to be a warrior? Am I supposed to be a warrior as a CPA? Because certainly there are warriors in that world. And the answer was clearly no. So I would go into my meditations with that question: how am I meant to be a warrior? And I started to, I call it wearing the uniform. I started to imagine, using my visualization skills, like being a warrior in different ways. So the military certainly came up to me, so I started thinking, well, I could fly jets. And so for about a week, I pretended in my mind during my meditations afterwards that I was flying jets for a living, military, fast jets. And interestingly enough...
This is before Top Gun?
Yeah, it's before Top Gun. Interestingly enough, I got bored because I was doing the same thing every day.
Yeah.
So I was like, I guess that's not it. So I even visualized myself being a roughneck, that's a big warrior thing, on a rig maybe in the North Sea somewhere, this gnarly, hard...
Yeah.
Or underwater, doing work.
Yeah, you're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and then I was like, I worked with that, and I realized that was also repetitive.
So this was probably a struggle, though, really trying to figure this out.
It is, and it is for everyone.
Yeah.
So I'm really articulating one of the most important things for everybody in life is to figure out who you really are and what you're going to do about it. And I feel very grateful that I had this practice of meditation, which slowed me down and got my mind stream kind of concentrated and able to expand into this intuitive awareness where I was getting help from my higher self, I guess.
Especially today with Facebook and social media, everything's sped up and the world's crazy.
Very few people I found, and especially in my work, have a clear sense of who they are and what they're supposed to do in the world. I mean, it does happen, for sure.
It's rare,
But it's pretty rare.
Yeah.
Most of us have to fumble our way there.
Yep. And most
So I
people
feel-
don't just burn the boats and go after it. They kind of
Yeah, that's right.
People settle.
Yeah, and they may take them 20 or 30 years
Yeah.
to get to it, or I'll finish this career and then, or, sometimes they never get to
Right.
it. And it's okay, because oftentimes you can fulfill it through a hobby or through charitable work or some other work. And that's okay.
Right.
There's no judgment here. Everyone's got their path.
So now you're down this path, and then how does it?
Yeah, so
How do you sign up?
I'm clear that I'm not meant to be a merchant CPA. I'm meant to be a warrior. I'm exploring different paths, different uniforms, so to speak. And one day I'm walking home. This is synchronicity, right? When you do this type of work, or you get closer and closer to your calling, or what the Buddhists would call your dharma, which is your calling in life, then synchronicity starts to show up for you, right? People come into your life that are like very helpful. You begin to see things or experience things that are like, oh yeah, that's how you're on the right
Kind of
path.
like the law of attraction in a way.
It's like that.
Okay.
You're attracting, or it might be even beyond that, right? There might be hidden support that's like, okay, yeah, you're going the right way. Here's another sign. So I'm walking home from work one day, probably on my way to the dojo. I can't remember the exact scenario, and I walk across or past a glass window, and there's a poster, and the top of the poster said, "Be someone special," and the poster showed Navy SEALs doing cool shit.
Yeah.
It didn't say anything about the SEALs.
Right. And the SEALs back
Just
then
said US
probably
Navy,
weren't what they
SEALs.
are today, though. Today they're
Back then, the SEALs were a secret organization, 700 strong. In fact, I went.
But it wasn't as famous, though, right? As
No,
it is today. Okay.
barely anyone knew about
Yeah.
it. And I think I had heard about him, but like I certainly
Yeah.
wasn't considering it. But I stared at that thing, and I was like, "Holy shit, that's it!
Yeah.
That's it!" And I went back in the recruiter's office the next day. I was like, "What's on that sign out there?" And they're like, "Oh, those are Navy SEAls. You don't want to know about those guys." I was like, "Yes, I do.
They're like, you don't look like a SEAL,
Yes, I
right?
do." So, anyways, to speed up the story a little bit, I knew right there. I said, "That's what I'm doing.
That's it, yeah.
That's my thing." So it took me a while to find, that I wanted to be an officer, because here I was going to be MBA, CPA, and the officer recruiter's like, "Dude, don't get your hopes up.
Yeah.
This is a really small unit.
Right.
There's only like 100 officers, and most of them come from the Naval Academy or ROTC, and they take maybe 15 a year out of there.
Yeah.
And sometimes they take one or two from the civilian world like you and send them to OCS and to SEAL. So if you really want this, I can work on a package for you
Yeah.
for that path. I said, do it, right? And so at that point in time, my entire mental world shifted, because training-wise, like I was like doing all this stuff to try to figure stuff out. Now I knew where I was going,
You can target it.
and so I could target that. And I already had all the functional fitness. As martial arts is very functional fitness. I already doing my high intensity interval training. I already doing my running. I was a competitive swimmer, so physically I had the right stuff. Just keep doing what I'm doing there. Mentally, though, what I did was I shifted my imagery work to now practicing who I needed to be a Navy SEAL. And so the way I did that, this is kind of back to a conversation about your son, you got to give them a mental anchor, right? And so just so happened that poster, they also had a recruiting video called Be Someone Special. And it showed 3 phases of SEAL training, first, second, and third phase. First phase is land, basically all the basic conditioning. That's where you see, all the guys in and out of the boats and running with logs.
Yeah.
And that's where Hell Week is, right? Where most people wash out. Second phase, when I went through, was land warfare, and most of it out at this island called San Clemente, where nobody could hear us scream when we worked around the clock.
Yeah.
And then third phase is dive, where we open closed circuit diving. And so it showed real SEALs going through this, and all the instructors, and then a mock mission. I watched this thing probably 20 times. And then in my mind, I inserted myself in that imagery. And every day after my morning run, I would sit down, I would do my practice, which it started to evolve into what I call this continuum, where I started just box breathing, inhale, hold, exhale, hold. I did that for about 5 minutes. That's calmed me down. That's the arousal
Can you
control.
explain box breathing really quickly? It's 5 seconds in, hold.
Yeah, it can be 4 or even
Okay.
3, but it's in a box pattern.
Okay.
But you want to ultimately get it to 5 in, 5 hold, 5 out, 5 hold. And when you do the inhale hold, it's lifting. You don't almost like you keep the airway open. You don't want to create back pressure.
Okay.
It's not good for your heart over time.
And then how long do you do that for?
I recommend minimum 5 minutes, up to 20 minutes.
Okay.
More than 20 minutes isn't going to do you much good. And less than 5 minutes isn't enough. And the key is to do it every day.
Okay.
Right? It's better to do 5 minutes every day than it is to do 3 hours on a weekend.
Gotcha.
It's consistent daily practice. So the box breathing is the arousal control. So what it does is it resets your automatic nervous system, your autonomic nervous system. So we're constantly in a state of fight or flight or aroused,
Especially in the
hyperarousal.
military, the adrenaline and
Not just that, but
Yeah,
everybody, right?
everybody, yeah.
You're in a hyperarousal, with time pressure, getting to work and driving traffic and getting cut off and road rage and everything. And you're in time pressure with all the due-outs and commitments that we have as students or as CEOs or as parents and helicoptering around. There's endless pressure that is virtual, meaning it's not real. There's no lion trying to eat you, right? It's not real, but it's triggering your sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. And so what happens is your parasympathetic nervous system actually goes into atrophy. The neurotransmitter that activates it stops being released. And so most people are stuck in hyperarousal,
Like a constant
a
state.
constant state. And so that becomes a new normal. And then they normalize it or rationalize it or feel normal through exercise, through coffee, through alcohol, through stimulants, through drugs.
What are your emotions like the night before training? Did you think that you could pass and become a Navy SEAL?
I did. So, and if you ask any one of my teammates who succeeded, and that's not many, right? 85% fail. We had 185 in my class, 19 of us graduated,
And you were number one.
the graduate honor man. So if you're gonna succeed at something that's that important to you, then you have to make failure not an option. And so our attitude, my attitude, and those of us who crush it, is that they'd have to kill me to get me out of here.